want you to picture in your mind like late 2019. Picture yourself there. The hope that you had as a human being, that was like 3 decades ago. Right? You're like 2020, it just sounds good, like clarity, vision, here we go. March 2020. Right? And then you get through 2020, a global pandemic. No one's ever predicted this thing before. You're like, we got through it. There's hope. Let's just get into January of 2021. You got 6 days into that year. Right? You just kind of keep moving. You're hoping it's going to get better. 2023, writer's strike. Right? 2020, every 4 years, they just get us with some type of political something. I don't care which way you vote. It just sucks for like 9 months, getting texts and listening to anything and watching social media. It's just brutal. Just like the beginning of this year, I'm on this stage just like fired up, level 10, Enneagram 3, talking about our dreams, and we're going into 2025 and this year, and what are we going to do? And I hate surprises like this. I hate when you're doing everything right in life and the unexpected is tragedy. I hate when you're in a relationship and it's going well and that person surprises you in that way. I hate when conflict just somehow finds you. You're like, I was just sitting here. Why are you bringing this to my doorstep? I hate when I am cleaning my side of the street and it all falls apart. I hate injustice. I hate injustice. I hate how unfair that it is. I hate that on Tuesday morning, 2 weeks ago, people were just dealing with big wins and they had no idea what was about to happen. And people who had worked for decades to own a home, to live somewhere, to make it in Los Angeles, lost everything. I hate it. I hate all of it. It drives me crazy that this is how the world works at times. And we can all take a collective inhale, and we can all take a collective exhale. I just don't like that that's how life is. And I know that it's reality. One of the things that I appreciate about our faith tradition is that it has never told us a lie about that reality. I grew up in faith traditions. I grew up in like fantastic like mega church evangelicalism in Colorado. I'm not even here to crap on it, but I didn't even know that like Easter was about Jesus' suffering. Easter was like 20,000 people and lasers, and like we were fired up. Like the whole crucifixion, we flew over that shit so fast, right? And we were just, life is good. We all have pools, right? This is suburbia, baby. Like, that's the Christianity I grew up with. Like, it's going to work out with you. You're going to name it. You're going to claim it. You're going to be blessed, and you are going to receive. And who does not want that? I want that. Yet the more I've been accustomed and learned just the richness and depth of our faith tradition, I realize so much of it is about struggle. So much of it is about the figuring it out. Maybe the beauty of life is actually found in struggle. And so today I want to talk about learning from struggle, because I just think that we're collectively all there. We're collectively all there as a city. Maybe it's poignant that it's also MLK Jr. weekend, which is not a story of somehow that is overcome and that dream has been fulfilled, but it is a reality that struggle continues. Struggle is just a part of life, and we learn from it. And maybe that's actually where we grow. It's not maybe. That is actually where we grow. That is where we evolve. And so to talk about struggle, we're going to talk about some things. We talked about January. I hate Januaries now. I'm just not for them anymore. Least favorite month. If you're born there, I'm sorry. I just don't like it. Like, we get so worked up coming out of Christmas into the new year. You're like, I'm doing this thing. New bod, new me, new whatever. No, none of it. Don't want it. Hate it. And since we talked about January, we're going to talk about Jacob. And if we can talk about Jacob, then we can talk about what it means to be a great survivor. If we can talk about what it means to be a great survivor, then we can talk about some of the great survivors in history, MLK Jr. and Gandhi and Lincoln and so many others. And if we can talk about MLK Jr. and Gandhi and Lincoln, then we can talk about what it means to have a recovering heart rate. And if we can talk about what it means to have a recovering heart rate, then we can talk about maximum vulnerability. Follow along with me in Genesis chapter 32. Here we go. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives. This is already a problematic story. And his 2 female servants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, right? This is one of those verses whenever someone wants to push you on biblical literalism, I'm like, turn the page, my friend. Let's go talk about this fun one. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. We're getting there. Yep. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" And then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God's face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. And therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. I'm sure that is one of your life verses. When we began the year, we wanted to begin with something called storytelling, kind of a series to be in, because I just think stories are such an important part of what it means to be human. It's how we learn. It's how we grow. It's why we love Marvel movies and epics and Star Wars and Disney and Pixar and all of the greats. It's why we love great literature. It's telling stories, and it's bringing us somewhere as human beings. It's showing us truth without always, how now, brown cow, unique New York. Betty bought some butter, but the better Betty bought was bitter, so Betty bought some better butter, but the bitter butter made the better butter bitter. All right, let's do it. Here we go. We got this thing. So in all of these great stories, we learn something as human beings, not because it directly tells us it, but because it shows us it. And so in the story of Jacob, there's a lot that's going on right now. The interesting thing about the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, this is the Gospels for the Jews, is that whenever it gives a lot of screen time to a particular story, that's where you should pay attention. It's not like current days where you just bring out Microsoft Word or make a note or put it on TikTok and it's so easy to create content. This is old school days, so write something down was very difficult. And so what they wrote down is trying to tell you what's important. And the story of Jacob is longer than any of the other stories of the patriarchs for a reason. The rabbis will debate and talk about this reality that the Israelites, that Israel was named after Jacob. It wasn't named after Isaac. It wasn't named after Abraham. And so they slow down in these stories to see what's really going on. This story of Jacob wrestling God is one of those stories that's kind of right in between Jacob's life. The first part of Jacob's life is this interesting story that he was one of the twins. He was born second. It says that when he came out of the womb, he was grabbing his brother's heel, which is a way of the Bible saying there's always going to be kind of conflict here in this narrative. That the Bible is always setting us up in these ancient traditions that are going on, that the first son is always the one who's supposed to receive the blessing. And yet it's the Bible is always saying that the struggle is just real, that there's always going to be a part of it where you're the minority figuring it out, you're coming up, you're sorting it out, that the blessing wasn't all for you, and yet you find a way. That even in the story of Jacob and his mom, there's this weird taking advantage of dad when dad was blind. The Bible's filled with weird stories, by the way. It's real Game of Thrones sometimes, right? Real People magazine with a dash of Entertainment Tonight, right? And so, is that still a thing? That is still a thing? Is Mario Lopez still doing that thing? No, he moved on? He was never on that? Okay, this is not the point of the sermon. Let's not, yeah. I'm basically a millennial, but in a millennial body, but a boomer. Doesn't matter. Let's move on still. Okay. So the story for Jacob is that he's still kind of stuck in this in-between place. And now, after they kind of like dupe dad because dad's blind and the blessing is being given out because this is what you do back in the day. So the dad asks for Esau to come forward, and the mom kind of says, okay, we're going to like put some like hairy like fur on you, and your dad's going to feel it. We're going to make you smell like Esau. We're going to trick dad. You're going to make him his favorite soup, and you're going to get the birthright. Again, weird story here. Right? So then they do that. They dupe dad. Esau comes back, and he's like, what the, right? I can't believe he did this to me. He wants to kill his brother. Jacob runs off, finds a wife, and he's gone for like 14 years because he finds this wife, and he's got to go through like 2 different seasons of marrying Rachel for 7 years each. If any of you did Awanas, you're keeping up with me. If you did not, honestly, you'll like catch up in like 2 hours if you start reading Genesis from the beginning. And then there's a moment where all this happens for Jacob, and he's ready to return home. It's this hero's journey that he had to go away. He makes sense of who he is. He feels remorse, to be honest. And he's going home, and he's about to encounter Esau. And then there's pause, because we're in the story we're at. And then there's all the stories later after he encounters Esau, and Esau was actually super generous to him, and it's out of Jacob that there'll be 12 children that are born, the 12 tribes of Israel, and it's a story of Joseph, and like the rest of the Genesis story is about Joseph, but it's really just also about Jacob and Jacob's faithfulness. And yet this story just finds itself in the middle, and it's just a story all about struggle. It's a story about figuring it out in those in-between spaces, which seems to be most of life. What I want life to be is promised land stories. That lands flowing with milk and honey. Translated to my time, bank account flowing, right? Private jets, Maui. That's what I want. And yet most of life is not that. Most of life is the in-between, the figuring it out. Maybe not there yet. That's where you're growing. You're working hard. Maybe life is what Richard Rohr talks about. It's 2 halves. There's the first half of life where you're proving yourself, you're creating, you're building, you're trying to make it happen. You don't have it all figured out. You want to conquer. There's conquest. It's all of that, and that's okay. And maybe the second half of life is now you have enough wisdom to know that that was never going to bring you happiness anyways, but you needed to go through all of that so that you would have some wisdom and have some experience to know what truly matters. And that's where Jacob's at. He's in this in-between place. And his whole life has been a struggle up to this point, everything. He was the second. Mom's got like a weird, like they needed to see a therapist and Freud, right? There's weird stuff happening here. And then there's like, brother's going to kill me, and I go away and I try to find a wife, and like 14 years, it's just struggle after struggle after struggle. And when I read these stories, the point of it is to take it seriously. It's just the Bible's trying to be honest with you. Maybe it's just struggle. Maybe struggle's not all bad. Maybe we were lied to a little bit about the American dream, that it's all just supposed to work out. And maybe it does work out, but maybe it doesn't work out like that. Maybe it doesn't always work out with lottery tickets. Maybe it doesn't always work out because God just blesses you in that way. Maybe how God blesses you is that God gives you wisdom. Maybe God gives you experience. Maybe God is with you in the midst of all of the struggle and figuring out. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's growth. Maybe that's maturity. Maybe it's just a different way of looking at faith, which, to be honest, a different way of looking at faith is the majority of the church for the majority of time, for the majority of history, which is really not the American church. And it's always this need for faith, this need for God, this need to embrace and understand struggle in a different way. And so if we're going to learn from struggle, I want to think about it in 3 ways, maybe 3 things that we can learn from. The first thing that I want to think about is just being a great survivor. Jacob is this great survivor in the story. I think where people are at in our city right now is that they're going to have to be great survivors. I think that we live in this world where we want to talk about is we want you to thrive and not survive, if you've ever heard something like that before, right? I've definitely been a part of a lot of those sermons. I'm not even mocking it. I'm saying I get that that's what we want. I get that that's what we want to participate in. That's not a bad thing. But maybe what we need to learn and grow in is that we can be great survivors. There's so much for us to learn in the surviving. There's so much for us to learn in the struggling. Why I love great figures in our world like Gandhi, or MLK Jr., or Lincoln, or you literally name them, is you go look at the story of MLK Jr., and we all know the quotes that are going to be put up on Instagram tomorrow. There's like 5 great ones, everyone's going to do it. I get it. I'm not even mocking that. I get it. That's like the hopeful stuff. I have a dream, right? And like where the moral arc of history is going to be bent to. Like I get all of that. But what I'm interested in the biographies of an MLK Jr. is that they're just honest. They're honest about a young man who tried committing suicide as an adolescent. They're honest about a young man who just dealt with tension in his life. The stories of MLK Jr. are honest about even when he was in the midst of being a figure for America and for the civil rights movement, just the despair that he felt in his heart, the constant wondering. What I love about some of those stories are even his failures, that sometimes we're so harsh on leaders, but I can't imagine the weight that people carry and the things that just leak out of us, which if we're fair and honest, it happens to us. So I can't imagine when the pressure is exponentially up 1,000 times more, that sometimes we critique these people in ways, but maybe we need to be more gracious, that they're trying to do great things, and they need more grace and more mercy, that they do have a vision for what we can be. And I love the honesty of those stories, not just all of the great quotes. I think the Bible and our faith tradition can be great quotes if you want it to be. It can be like, good Twitter one-liners, or it can be the stories themselves, and it can be the complexity. And the story of Jacob is about surviving, and then surviving, and then about surviving, and then about struggling, and then about figuring it out, and then about not working out, and it's about all of these different things. And it's all things that don't always work out. One of the things about being a great survivor is sometimes that in surviving is that you go through conflict. Sometimes in surviving, you go through criticism. Sometimes in surviving, you go through contradiction. This is kind of the growing up that happens in the struggle that is life. And I think that's a great lesson for us to learn, that sometimes we learn when we're criticized. Sometimes we learn in the middle of contradiction, and we always learn in the middle of conflict. What I'm trying to tell you is I avoid those things like the plague. I am a good Enneagram 3. All that I want to do is outwork everybody and be running at 100 miles per hour and to stand at the end of my life with applause and people to say, "What a good job you have done, Cory." That's what I want. And when things get in the way of that, I personally hate it. And yet what I know to be true is that it's in the moment that I've dealt with conflict, whether that be just the conflict of reality, the conflict that happens in marriage, the conflict that happens in my most personal relationships. That's really where I've grown. That's really where I've become somebody different. Does anybody here love criticism? No! And yet I will give this to you. This is a room filled with creatives. How many of you are in the industry? Right? How many of you are parents? How many of you are in leadership of any kind? Let me tell you just those three things. If you choose to be in leadership, if you choose to be a creative, if you choose to make other human beings, then you give the people the luxury of having an opinion about you. And if you're going to give people the luxury of having an opinion about you, sometimes it is going to hurt. There's a struggle that's real in that. Sometimes the conflict is something that you don't choose, like the fires that we just went through. Sometimes it just feels unfair and unjust, and this came out of nowhere, and I don't want any of this. I don't want to struggle. I don't want to be forced into it. And that final C is contradiction. Sometimes we realize that we grow because we have to get out of the box that we were given to make sense of life. Almost all of you are in this room for that reason. You were given a certain version of a story of faith, a certain version of a story of Jesus, a certain tradition, and honestly, you no longer fit in that box anymore. You tried for a long time, faithfully. You showed up here, and every week I hear from someone, "I never thought I'd come to church before." Anyone ever walk in this room saying that? And then you did. Because you had to learn to deal with contradiction. You had to learn to deal with the reality that 2 plus 2 does equal 4, and then there's like other advanced calculus, and then there's other versions. There's so many just bigger pieces of the narrative that you had to deal with now. Some of the times was just dealing with yourself and the struggle that was real there of learning to accept who you are and that it's okay and that you're good and that it's beautiful. But the truth of it is that struggle is what made you. That being a great survivor is not anything that we ever wish upon ourselves. It's not even the path we choose, but it is the path where we learn the most. It is the path where we grow through that suffering, through that pain, through not having it all together. If we can just honor the reality that being a great survivor, and even the greatest figures of all time, they were all survivors, and that's really where they had something to offer the rest of the world. Not because life was perfect for them, not because they were just a Harvard MBA, but because they struggled. Because they saw something in the world and they wanted to change that. If we can accept that reality, if we could even choose that for ourselves, if we can say that's even part of our Jesus tradition, that the crucifixion, that the cross, that Friday is just a part of our story, then maybe we can go to another learning lesson from struggling. And that is just recovering heart rate. One of the great things that I also see from all of these leaders is that as they go through these things, whatever these things are, they take time to grow and to heal and to expand themselves because of them. Now, that's not your only option, by the way. You can go through struggle, and you can go through pain, and you can go through suffering, and you don't have to expand at all. You can just choose cynicism. Just go on Instagram, and you'll find plenty of it. You can just choose hate. You can just choose being angry. But here's what I have learned over time. That it's not that those emotions are all bad. They are trying to tell you something, but they are not always true. And if you stay there, they are not your best teachers. But when you work through them, when you work through the hate, when you work past the cynicism and past the anger, this is where we need resurrection. That when Jesus comes out of the tomb, Jesus doesn't come out of the tomb, no scars. What's the first thing he does to his followers? Look right here. The wounds were real. Yes, they killed me. Yes, it was betrayal. Yes, it was loss. Yes, it was grief. Yes, it was death. This was unjust. It was unfair. None of this should have happened, but it did. And now you have a choice. The whole world wasn't changed when Jesus was resurrected, but Jesus was, and that's the beauty of our faith. And Jesus gives you an option. You want to go be like the people that killed me? Give it a shot and go release all of the hurt that was done to you and let me know how the world works out for you. Or you can transform your pain so that you do not transmit it. That's the journey of your faith. Do you want to be a part of that? And every time you go through those things, not because you wish it upon you, not because it's fair, not because God does God's hardest things to God's toughest soldiers or whatever that weird verse is, or that's not even a verse, it's just what weird people say, right? That's not good faith. I don't want a God who's playing games with me. And I don't have answers for it all. Some of it's a mystery. I don't know why this happened, but it did. And now I have a choice in it about how I want to go through it. And every time I go through it, and every time I participate in healing in it, then I have a different recovering heart rate in this thing. It's true of our physical health. That's how we test physical health. You go run and you go sprint, and it's not about how high you can get your heart rate. It's about how quickly can it recover. And the more you do those sprints, the more you exert yourself, the more strenuous the activity, then over time your heart recovers quicker. And that's just a part of growing up. Again, don't wish that upon anybody. That's never the goal. But we have a choice in it. If we can talk about what it means to be a great survivor, and if we can go through a recovering heart rate, I think the last thing that I learned from struggling is really just maximum vulnerability. I have learned this in life in all of the biggest struggles. This is the time that I'm most vulnerable and that I'm most open to God, if I choose it. And every time that I have chosen it, it's changed my life. For the last 2 weeks, these are the moments that we pray. Even if you found yourself not really praying, man, God, would you be with those people? Man, God, would you save my house? Man, God, would you be there for us? Maybe you've had those personal moments, that breakup. God, I don't think I can get through this. Maybe you've had the personal moments of addiction and you never thought you'd be there again. God, I got to get back one day at a time. I don't think that I have it. Pick your struggle. For you parents that just have kids and you pray every day just for their safety, that vulnerability is those moments when we realize we have nothing else. I've shared the story in here before, but I'll share it again. I remember being in my therapist years ago. My therapist is talking to me about vulnerability, and I'm like, I am great at vulnerability. He's like, no, you are horrible at it. He's like, you're great at self-disclosure, and those are not the same things. And I told him, F you, and I walked out of the office. I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to reach out to somebody. I don't want to tell them that I have need. I want to care for you. I want to be there for you. I want to show up. I want my life to be working out for me. Vulnerability is an animal. Think of that that little puppy. It needs its mama right there because nothing in the world is going to protect it. That's vulnerability. Someone who's going to feed you and hold you and watch you and make sure that you are okay. And I think it's in these moments, even as we grieve corporately as a city, even if you weren't directly impacted by this fire, it's a moment where corporately we say, God, we're vulnerable together. We need you. We need something beyond ourselves. That this is a real struggle. We have no idea what rebuilding looks like. We have no idea if these communities will ever look the same. There's so many unanswered questions. There's the wonder, will government step up and do its thing? There's just endless, all of that. And in the midst of all of that, we still have a choice. And maybe that simple choice is just saying to God, I'm here. I need you. I need something beyond myself. And maybe together we'll grow. Maybe together we'll transform. Maybe together we'll heal. Maybe together we'll mature. I don't wish struggle upon any of us. In fact, I would love to be a prosperity gospel preacher, and I joke around on this all the time, but yes, I would definitely love to have a private jet. But until then, that's a joke, by the way. I want to be a community that does struggle well, that we learn from it, that we grow from it, that we sit in conversation time with one another and we tell each other, and we're there for each other, and we can admit when we're vulnerable, because the beauty of this place will be those moments when we care, when we love, when we show up. You know, Abbey, you do that anyways. Thank you for all of the ways that you reached out in these last couple of weeks. Thank you for every single one of you who sent a message, who checked in on a neighbor, who prayed, who gave $1, who did anything because you care. And that's a gift of this community, and we want to keep growing in it with one another. You're going to find the same 3 or 4 people around you, and you're going to answer this question. What can your struggle teach you? Enjoy.